The maps the children learn about talk about all of Palestine with no interest in the West Bank or Gaza. The children learn an educational system which is unique. If it was funded by Iran and Saudi Arabia, this story would not be relevant to people in Ottawa. However, since Canada is contributor number 8 amongst the 20 contributors on the list of contributors to UNWRA, and since Canada chairs the refugee working group of nations that contribute to UNWRA, and since Canada last year gave $14 million to UNWRA special projects, mostly in the area of education, we're bringing this to the attention of the Canadian government today.
Is Canada funding education projects that it shouldn't be? Projects that David Bedein, who is with us now, says are preparing Palestinian children in Gaza and the West Bank to be on a war footing. David joins us now for more on this. We're talking about the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. This is an agency that specifically works in Israel, works in the West Bank, works in Gaza. Am I correct?
Also in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria.
Okay, where there are refugee camps. That's for correct. Palestinian refugee camps. They run schools. What's the problem with the schools?
The schools have a war curriculum from A to Z, training Palestinian youth, the descendants of Palestinian refugees from 1948, to take back their homes within Israel proper from 1948.
So this isn't what President Obama talked about, got in trouble for, and lost a seat in New York yesterday over, about returning to the 1967 boundaries.
Right.
This is about take everything.
The 1947 lines plus more. You have a situation where the PLO, working with the United Nations, with United Nations sanction, and 38 Western democracies, putting into a system where you have a war curriculum, children learning about the military struggle, children learning about the armed struggle, children learning how to revere anyone who murders Jews, children learning that all of Palestine must come instead of Israel. That's their education. And if that doesn't stop, we can't continue with any kind of process. There's a very interesting dissonance. Next week at the United Nations, we'll be discussing, we don't know exactly what we're going to be discussing because the PLO negotiations department is keeping their cards to their chest, as they always do.
Okay.
But our news agency, I run a news agency, we call the PLO negotiating department, are you asking for the West Bank and Gaza? They wouldn't say so on the phone, because I know they're not. Because they're asking for everything. What they're asking for is West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem first. And by the way, they never say East Jerusalem, they say Al-Quds Al-Sharia, Holy Jerusalem, and then everything afterwards through what they call the right of return. Imagine if the Germans, there were more than 10 million Germans who left their homes, were forced out of their homes after World War II, if they were demanding to go back to Czechoslovakia, or now the Czech Republic, or to Poland, or anywhere else where they were forced out of. This is 63 years, in that case 67 years after a conflict. That doesn't happen except in this case. Now, Canada has pulled out from the general funds from UNWRA, still supplies food supplements for people in the Palestinian in these Palestinian camps run by UNWRA. But Canada is one country of many that participates in a system that encourages an entire population and their descendants to make war with Israel.
Prime Minister Stephen Harper runs a government that has taken a lot of heat for being too friendly with Israel. In fact, there's the Organization of Islamic Conference, the largest lobby group at the UN, has come out denouncing Stephen Harper today, saying that he's far too friendly with Israel, he's too pro-Zionist, this is despicable for a leader of a sovereign country to make the statements he did. And that was in relation to his most recent comments about Islamic terrorism and Islamicism being the greatest threats, terror-wise, to the free world. Do you think that if Canada is still funding this, it's because it doesn't know what's going on here?
Canada continues to fund food supplements in the UNWRA camps. This is
and a lot of people would say, that's fine, keep people alive, there's nothing wrong with that.
What's the issue here?
Where are we funding the education part?
The issue here is that Canada participates it participates with other countries in a system keeping UNWRA operative, instead of proposing, from a humanitarian point of view, that UNWRA take on the UNHCR principle. What's the UNHCR principle? United Nations High Commission for Refugees, to help refugees not depend on this system, but to get resettled, whether within the Palestinian areas or outside of the outside of the Palestinian areas at all. What we filmed was thousands of Palestinians being resettled from Iraq, people who were Palestinian refugees who were abandoned in Iraq, placing them in Chile, placing them in places in Eastern Europe, placing them even in Iceland, and there's countries ready to receive them. But Canada can go a step further, okay? When you give people food subsidies to stay where you are in refugee camps, there's a problem there. Now, I'm a social worker by profession. When you have dependence on a system, that's the problem. A system which, as a system, is encouraging war of the liberation of all of Palestine. There's a problem there. And we can look at this not only as a pro-Israel issue, but also of concern of the inappropriateness of creating a refugee system that lies to the people, that says you're going to go back to their homes or your homes from 1948, which no longer exist. That is the problem. So it's Stephen Harper, Jason Kenney, these other people who stand up, they don't only stand up for Israel, they're standing up for integrity. And the integrity of anyone who does have a heart for the Palestinian refugees and their descendants should not be throwing money at them with food or anything else, but should be developing a system to help them for their future outside of those refugee camps.
David, you've got a book coming out tonight, is
it?
Yes,
it's September 15, midnight tonight it comes out. It'll be an ebook called Where Has All the Flour Gone? The Whims and Waste of United Nations Refugee Policy for Palestinians.
Okay, so what's this image on the front? This is an important image?
This is an extremely important image.
This is the front of a school, correct?
No. It's worse than that. This is the entrance to the Ida refugee camp just inside of Bethlehem, where you have a key, a 2-ton key representing the keys to the homes they lost in 1948, and a keyhole. And this is next. Now, the United Nations tries to deny it has anything to do with UNWRA. And if you look carefully at the picture, if you do a wide-angle lens, you'll see it's right next to the UNWRA, the United Nations office, the headquarters of that camp, of that refugee facility.
So the United Nations is essentially teaching this, or allowing it to be taught in their schools. They're supporting it elsewhere.
The United Nations is facilitating a war against Israel through the UNWRA refugee camps, keeping 4 million people in refugee camps under the false premise and promise of what they call the right of return. And that is what needs to be addressed, not only from a pro-Israel point of view, from a point of view of clear humanitarian concern, so that refugees will not be manipulated to die, to kill themselves, and for a cause that they cannot possibly achieve.
All right. David, thank you very much for coming in.